Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce a great friend and one of the CCB's most important assets. He's a senior research office at the Canadian Council of the Blind. He is a past vice president of research at the CNIB and past research director of Blind and Low Vision New Zealand. Dr. Gordon is also an adjunct professor in the Department of Ophthalmology and Vision Sciences at the University of Toronto and was the principal investigator of the Canadian Council of the Blind study, a report card on the vision health in Canada 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Keith Gordon.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you everybody for being here this afternoon, and for all of you out there in cyber world who are enjoying, hope you're enjoying a nice lunch. We are. To start with, I'd like to repeat what Morgan said this morning about how to ask a question. There are two ways. Firstly, you can click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and you can type in your question and click send. Well, that's the first way. Using your computer, click the Q&A icon, or you can email your question to education@fightingblindness.ca. And I'll repeat this all prior to the question period afterwards. So to kick off this afternoon's session, I'd just like to provide a little background on the Canadian Survey on Disability. First of all, I'd like to thank these members of Statistics Canada who came here this afternoon to tell us all about the Canadian Survey on Disability. The communication between the people of the sight loss community, if I can put it that way, and Canadian Survey on Disability is very meaningful, and hopefully you'll give them enough feedback that next time they design the survey, it will be just a little bit better. Not that it's a problem now. Okay, so to kick it off, I'd like to provide a little background on what the Canadian Survey of Disability is. The purpose of the Canadian Survey of Disability, as described on their website, is to provide information about Canadian youth and adults whose everyday activities are limited due to a long-term condition or health-related problem. The survey is conducted every 5 years, and the most recent survey was conducted in 2022. The information from the survey is broken down into a number of categories. The one of primary interest to our audience clearly being the category that they call as seeing disability. The overall results of the 2022 survey were released on the 1st of December last year, and the full data of people with a seeing disability we hope to be released within the next short while. And they'll tell you when they're going to release it. To give you an idea of what's contained in the survey and how complex it is, I'd like to read you the list from the Canadian Survey of Disability website. The survey collects information on the type and severity of disability, the use of assistive aids, devices, and technologies, daily help received or required, use of various healthcare therapies and services, educational attainment, labor force participation details, requirements and unmet needs for accommodations at school or work, medication and cannabis use, accessibility barriers, the experience of being housebound, social isolation, food security, homelessness, veterans of the Canadian Armed Forces with disabilities, internet use, sources of income, sexual orientation, and COVID-19. I deliberately go through that. I may put you to sleep, but it just gives you an idea of the complexity of the survey and how important it can be to all of us that work in the disability field to have data like this. I'm a data nerd. I just love data. And to have a survey like this, to utilize data like that is really, really helpful. And hopefully we can keep building on what they already have. This is a long list, and it's for this reason that we've asked Statistics Canada people to come here today and give us some insight into what they do and what the data all means. And with all this as background, you didn't come here to hear me talk. I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker. Our first speaker is going to provide an overview of the importance of data and accessibility. Our first speaker is Tony Labillois, Director General, Justice, Diversity and Population Statistics Branch at Statistics Canada. Tony has more than 30 years of experience at Statistics Canada, including 23 years in the management team. His experience at Statistics Canada spans almost all StatsCan activities, but most importantly for today's symposium, Tony is also the executive champion for persons with disabilities. He's well positioned to understand the statistical needs associated with disability, and with all that as background, I'd like to introduce you to Tony Labillois.
Wow. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Kwe. Thank you very much for the kind words of introduction about myself, but also about the work that we do. I'm glad we have at least one fan in the room, one person that likes data. I hope at the end of this, I will have more fans, if not already the case. I was also born legally blind, by the way, for me, it's my normal eyesight since I was born. I started at Statistics Canada many years ago, as it was said, and I want to give you a bit of an overview of the work that we do. Before that, I want to acknowledge we're on the Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, where I have the chance to work, live, and play. And I want to also mention that I'm wearing a tie and a white shirt, and I'm in my 50s. I could have said my 40s, but I'm not going to cheat. And I have more and more gray hair than dark hair, so that's part of life. I still have my hair. I'm happy. I will mention that Statistics Canada is our national statistics agency. We provide data on all kinds of aspects, economic, environmental, and social aspects for Canadians to understand where we're at as a country, to understand where the different segments of the population also are at, and how they're functioning as in our country. Statistics Canada has the census every 5 years. One of the surveys that we're doing after each census is that Canadian survey on disability. So you will hear why and how after me. We have more than 350 surveys, active surveys that we do on all kinds of aspects, environmental, economic, and social aspects, as I mentioned. We really value the collaboration that we have with organizations like the Canadian Council for the Blind, and with all the other stakeholders that we can have as allies for encouraging Canadians to participate in these statistical processes. We talk about surveys, but we have more and more modern processes as well, where we're trying to use alternative sources of data to minimize the burden and the cost and accelerate the timeliness of what we disseminate. We disseminate everything for free on our website for the standard products. Yes, there are some surveys that are cost recovery or some tabulations that are very specific that are cost recovery. But we give everything we can to all Canadians at 8:30 each morning in what we call the daily, our daily publication. We didn't invent anything very complex for the name of the publication, but that's easy to remember. You also can benefit from our InfoStats services. If you're looking for something in our massive wealth of data assets, we have employees that can help you. You can contact them at InfoStats on our website, and they will answer your questions directly, or if the questions are more complex, they will refer those questions to people like the ones that are with me today. Certainly not to the Director General, because he would not know the answers. He counts on the wonderful subject matter knowledge of people like Susan and Marisa. I will talk about Jeremy later. We can count on him too, but it's more on the accessibility side. Okay. We really care about the confidentiality of the data that we receive from Canadians. What we publish is only aggregated information. And this is in our legislation to protect the confidentiality as much as it is to collect and compile and publish on many aspects of the environment, the economy, and the society. And that confidentiality is very dear to our heart, because we know that it's what keeps the trust in our organizations for Canadians to provide the information, and for the users to believe that what we publish is really coming from the truths that we receive from the different people, organizations, businesses, governments even provide information to StatsCan on different topics. We pride ourselves in our independence, our transparency, our professionalism, and in making sure we provide more and more disaggregated data on the different segments of the population. Racialized groups, women, the people from the veterans that worked in our armed forces, for example, indigenous communities, and so on. We received some funding in budget 2021, but in addition to the funding for different surveys and programs that we would produce more and more disaggregated data on the different segments of the population, we're trying to have, and I think we're successful at making a culture shift. So yes, for example, for persons with disabilities, we have the Canadian Survey on Disability, but also we have more and more other surveys providing results for this segment of the population. Labor Force Survey, for example, or Canadian Community Health Survey, the General Social Statistics Program, and so on. So there's a lot of efforts since 2021 to provide more and more information on segments of the population that I know you care about, and that's why I think I can have more and more allies after this. The statistical agency that we have is very centralized compared to others in the world, and it's also very well respected in Canada and by other countries. And we also collaborate on standards in Canada and elsewhere in the world so that we provide state-of-the-art information according to standards in a coherent, comparable way, and that we also make sure that these disaggregated data that we provide are going to be comparable over time. You will see that the Canadian Survey on Disability now has more comparability than before. And thank you for mentioning all the list of aspects that we look at. It shows the complexity, but it's also showing the richness of the data assets that we have. And it's also showing the amount of analytical work that we have to do and that other researchers will have to do over the coming years to harness all the power of this and extract all the richness from that raw material that we received from Canadians and that we compiled. And we published the first results on December 1st. I should speak about accessibility as well. It was mentioned that I'm the champion for persons with disabilities. I've done that since 2002 in our organization. As part of our management team, we all have different corporate hats. I was supposed to do that for a year or two, but I learned that there was a lot to be done, and that there was a lot to accomplish there. And I also selfishly learned a lot for my own leadership from the experience and the heterogeneity of experiences from many persons with disabilities and many managers that I encountered in my job. Since 2019, there's a Canadian Accessibility Act that was passed. There's also a strategy in the public service for accessibility. Each department now also has to prepare an accessibility plan. And I'm quite proud of what we're doing at StatsCan and the accomplishments we already published in our first annual report. I'm also quite proud of the progress we did on disaggregated data. As I mentioned, by the way, I forgot to mention that part, that we published two progress reports on what we did to publish more and more disaggregated data. Jeremy has a presentation about the different work that we're doing, not just for providing data this time, but for providing an inclusive and accessible, diverse workplace, and also making sure that those services, those programs, those policies that we do for our users and for our respondents and so on, that everything is more and more accessible. Not that it wasn't before 2019, I think we had made progress, but that has significantly, as you will see, accelerated what Statistics Canada can offer to its clients, its users, its partners, and its employees. I think I'll stop there, and I encourage you to think of your questions, not just for me, but for my colleagues also, for the discussion that we will have after that. I think I will pass the floor to Marisa, who will make the presentation on the Canadian Survey on Disability. Oh, you okay? Sorry.
I'd just like to introduce.
You can introduce her.
Okay, thanks. Wow, 350 surveys. As you were talking, you're talking about accessibility and the accessibility of, I'm sure your meanings did not apply to the fact that your data is accessible because you open yourselves up to people like us to come and ask you questions and to come to our meetings and to interact with us. That's another aspect of accessibility, and I thank you all for doing all of that. So moving along, I'd like to introduce Susan Wallace, who's Section Chief, Disability and Accessibility Statistics, and Marissa Vachon, who's the Analyst of Disability and Accessibility Statistics. Susan and Marissa will be telling us specifically about the Canadian Survey on Disability 2022. Susan Wallace is the manager responsible for the Canadian Survey on Disability, as well as other projects related to disability and accessibility statistics. She has been with the Disability and Accessibility Statistics section since 2020 and at Statistics Canada since 2006. Marissa Vachon is an analyst on the Canadian Survey on Disability. She began her career at Statistics Canada in 2018, working for the Disability and Accessibility Statistics section. Welcome, Susan and Marissa, and thank you very much for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would firstly like to thank you very much for having us. We're very excited for the opportunity to present some data that we've gathered from the 2022 Canadian Survey on Disability. I'm sure that many folks here are very excited to see some of the new data that we have on disability in Canada. So just as a little run through of our presentation today, we'll be doing a quick overview of some of the methodological and historical aspects of the CSD, then move on to key findings for 2022, including some information on demographics of disability, employment, income, barriers, and accessibility. I'll also be touching on some data specific to Ontario and persons with a seeing disability based on what the CSD team has been able to work on so far. After that, we'll look at some of our dissemination plans for future products. I'll ask that any questions be held on until the end of the presentation, as you might find the answer while we go along. So the way that we have measured disability in Canada has evolved over time. You'll see on the left side of the slide that we have the medical model of disability, which really focuses on the impairment of health conditions that an individual may experience. Then on the right side of the screen, we have the social model of disability, which is what the CSD is currently based on. The model focuses on more of how a person's functional limitation interacts with the environment around them and how social and physical barriers arise out of that interaction. Under the social model approach, we're able to look at disability as a social disadvantage that comes out of an unsupportive environment instead of being a health condition alone. Now, in line with the evolution of approaches, you can see that the Canadian Survey on Disability has moved away from the medical model and towards the social model of disability. As part of collecting data on health, Statistics Canada continues to include measures of functional limitations and chronic conditions on surveys such as the Canadian Community Health Survey. This way we can provide data from both medical and social perspectives. I'll move along now to some of our methodological and sampling pieces. The CSD covers persons aged 15 and over as of May 11, 2021, which is the census day, who reported that they sometimes, often, or always have difficulty with daily activities because of a long-term condition, as part of the activities of daily living questions on the 2021 census long-form questionnaire. I will also say that our population sample excludes those who are living on a First Nations reserve, along with those living in collective dwellings, such as group homes, which is notable for our survey's subject matter. So the total sample size for the CSD was 54,000 individuals, and our overall response rate was 61.1%. Following collection, the CSD was linked to the census, allowing us to add an additional 350 variables to the CSD file. In the future, we'll also be linking the CSD to the T1 family tax file in order to provide some more information related to income. We use the disability screening questions, or DSQ for short, to identify persons considered to have a disability. The DSQ follows the social model of disability, meaning that for a disability to be identified, there needs to be a limitation to the person's daily activities. The presence of a difficulty or functional limitation alone is not sufficient for disability identification for the CSD purposes. In order to do this, the DSQ must first measure to the degree to which difficulties are experienced across various domains or functioning, and then asked how often daily activities are limited by these difficulties. Only persons who report a limitation in their day-to-day activities are identified as having a disability. Now, in our questionnaire wording, we don't actually tell anyone that they have a disability. Instead, we will refer to a condition when we need to refer to a particular experience. This is because people may not identify as having a disability despite the limitations that they experience. The DSQ allows us to identify 10 disability types, which you'll see on screen, and an unknown type, as well as compute severity scores for each one. So the severity is based on a mixture of factors, including the degree of the activity limitation, its frequency, and the number of disability types a person is experiencing. The score is useful because it acts as a strong predictor for labor force participation, as well as indicating the number of supports that a person might require. Now, we do include a footnote in our products whenever we speak to the severity score to explain that it doesn't provide a comprehensive label or judgment for the person's disability or their personal experience. I will skip over this because I think we covered it. Now, I mentioned earlier that the CSD is comparable for the first time between 2017 and 2022. That was possible because of the level of consideration applied at every stage of the survey development process, including content development, survey design, questionnaire development, testing, collection, and data processing. This will allow us to be able to compare the rate of disability between two periods of time. So, for example, saying whether the rate has increased or decreased over time. With that said, there are some areas that are not comparable for a few reasons. For example, we modified some response categories in order to reduce respondent burden and to allow respondents to move through the survey more easily. If you are interested in learning a bit more about comparability, I highly recommend taking a look at our Concepts and Methods Guide, which is publicly available on the StatCan website. In the interest of time, I will skip this slide, but please feel free to ask any questions at the end about alternative data sources. Okay, let's get to the data, which is, I think, why a lot of people are here. So now that you've all patiently waited and listened to the methodological aspects, we can get to some great data that the 2022 CSD was able to produce. I will note that the data you see on screen is mostly for the national level unless specified. I will start with the headline data, which is that we've seen an increase in persons with disabilities in Canada from 2017 to 2022. So in 2017, we saw 6.2 million persons with disabilities. In 2022, that rose to 8 million people. That is an increase of 5 percentage points over those 5 years. This increase can partially be attributed to both the aging population and a large increase in mental-related disabilities among youth and working-age adults. And this increase in prevalence rate between 2017 and 2022 was present in all provinces and most territories. This change is statistically significant for all provinces and territories with the exception of Nunavut. For Ontario specifically, we can see that 2017 rate of disability among Ontario population was 24.1%, and the rate for 2022 was 28%, meaning that there was a 3.9 rise in disability prevalence. From the gender perspective, the rate of disability was higher among women than in men, where 30% of women had a disability compared to 24% of men. This follows the same pattern that we saw in 2017. This trend is true for Ontario as well, where 30.8% of women were likely to have a disability compared to 25% of men. Looking at the gender aspect from a slightly different lens, women were also more likely to have a severe disability compared to men. One more important change that we've been able to make to the 2022 CSD was to specify the concept of gender rather than just sex at birth. Because the population affected by this change is small, we don't expect this to have a substantial impact on our historical comparison, but it allows us to grow a more fulsome understanding of all gender profiles in the subject population. This slide gives us a better understanding of severity score in action. We see that 59% of persons with disability had milder disabilities and 41% had more severe disabilities. And the proportion of persons with disabilities having milder disabilities increased by 2% between 2017 and 2022, while those with more severe disabilities decreased by the same percentage points during the same period of time. In Ontario, we see the same trend as we do at the national level. So in 2022, we saw in Ontario that there was 3.5% increase in people with milder disabilities, bringing the proportion to 56.1%. And there was a decrease in 1.3% in Ontario for those classified with having severe disabilities. Here we see that youth experienced the largest increase in disability from 2017 to 2022, with the most prevalent disability type for that age group being mental health related, learning, and pain related disabilities. We see some differences with the types of disabilities for older groups as well, so both seniors and the working age population with disabilities had pain related disabilities as their most prevalent disability type. The most common disability type in 2022 was pain-related, as it was in 2017. With that said, mental health-related disabilities experienced the largest increase in that time period. I'll note here that all the data presented on this slide is for the prevalence of disability types among persons with a disability, but data is also available for prevalence of persons among the total population. Persons with disabilities often had more than one disability type. So, in 2022, 30% of all Canadians with a disability had one disability type, where 37% of Canadians had 2 or 3 disability types, and 34% of Canadians had 4 or more disability types. Furthermore, we found that as individuals aged, they were more likely to have more than one disability. Persons with disabilities were more likely to be employed in 2022 than in 2017, with the employment rate for persons with disabilities rising 3% since 2017. I will note here that the use of 2017 and 2022 refers to the survey years, whereas persons' employment status reflects the answers of respondents that gave their answers to the 2016 and 2021 census. These findings are consistent with other sources such as Labor Force Survey, which is stating to do a lot of work on labor for persons with disabilities thanks to the inclusion of the DSQ into their survey model. Moving along, we'll be looking at the financial disadvantage of disability. We can see discrepancies among various populations of interest. Perhaps most notably, we see that persons with disabilities are more likely to have a lower median income as compared to persons without disabilities. If we look at it from severity perspective, persons with more severe disabilities have a lower median income than persons with milder disabilities. Specifically, in Ontario, the median after-tax income for all persons with disabilities 15 and older, regardless of severity class, was $33,020. However, when we break it down into severity types, we see that those with milder disabilities in Ontario had a median income of $38,640 compared to $29,400 for persons with more severe disability types. I will note here too that this income is based on the 2020 tax year data collected as part of the census. The 2022 included a series of questions specifically dedicated to accessibility. These questions touched on barriers with the built environment, communication, online activities and behaviors, and misconceptions, assumptions that a person with a disability might experience. The first look at the data shows that nearly 3/4 of persons with disabilities experience one or more of the 27 types of barriers to accessibility because of their condition in the past year. Barriers related to features inside or outside of public spaces were the most commonly experienced barriers, followed by barriers related to communication. Thank you. The next 2 slides will address data on persons with seeing disabilities. In 2022, 2.18 million, or 7.4% of Canadians aged 15 and over had a seeing disability. The rate of employment among persons with a seeing disability aged 25 to 64 years was 59%, whereas the median income for personal after-tax income among persons with a seeing disability aged 25 to 64 years was $38,060. Moving on to some data on aids and assisted devices for persons with seeing disabilities. Of those with a seeing disability, 93% use one or more aid or assisted devices. Of those who required vision-related aids or assisted devices, 78% had all of their needs met. The top 3 aids and assisted devices used by persons with seeing disabilities are eyeglasses or contact lenses, magnifiers, and large print reading materials. In terms of future plans, we are planning to release a profile paper this coming year, which will speak to some demographic, employment, and income aspects to Canadians with disabilities. We will also be releasing a series of coder tables with great information on demographic, employment information, and accessibility-related data. Some of these will also speak to accessibility performance indicators framework. If you have used coder tables in the past, you'll be familiar with many ways that you can manipulate them and show data for exactly what you're looking for. For example, it's possible to limit data to specific provinces, age groups, etc. We'll get a chance to highlight some more of our data in May 2024 for National Accessibility Week. And we have a whole slew of other projects planning that are still coming in the future years. With that said, we're always interested in learning more about the needs of our data users, so please feel free to chat about us with what that might be. You'll see some helpful links on this slide to our IMDb, which is basically a repository for all survey-related information. It is also where you'll find our super helpful concept and methods guide. You can find our most recent daily article, where we highlighted some of the points raised today along with some more detail. And we also have a lovely infographic on the left side of the screen which speaks to some of the major data points from 2022. So with that said, I'd like to say a huge thank you for allowing us to take time to speak today about the CSD. And if you are interested in learning more about the CSD, you can visit our website or contact some of the emails below if you are interested in getting some specific tables or tabulations made. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Marissa. And I'm going to hold any questions until after the next talk, and then we will take questions from the virtual audience and questions from anybody within the room here. Okay, our next speaker is Jeremy Plant. Jeremy is manager of the Accessibility Secretariat at Statistics Canada. Jeremy is a passionate advocate for disability inclusion. His 22-year public service career includes significant experience in communications, public opinion research, marketing, performance measurement, and stakeholder relations. Sounds like they've got you doing 10 jobs there. Facing mounting challenges with disability head-on has made him hyper-aware of barriers to disability inclusion. Jeremy has funneled his awareness into his work, supporting disability inclusion in various aspects of the public service, including, but not limited to, the design of Workplace 2.0. That Workplace 2.0 is a government-wide initiative to modernize the workplace, and even I, who's not exactly a computer whiz, have heard about it. He has supported and consulted on many aspects of accessibility in the public service and supported the 2019 Ministerial Summit on Accessibility and the Accessible Canada Act Royal Assent ceremonies. Jeremy will provide an overview of the Statistics Canada Accessibility Plan and fill us in on the progress report on this plan. So with that, I will welcome Jeremy Plant. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you very much, Dr. Gordon. Really appreciate that. So, hello everyone, merci beaucoup. Un plaisir d'être ici.
I think we're speaking in English today. Ben, à la fin, si vous avez des questions en français, n'hésitez pas de les poser dans votre langue officielle de choix. It's an honor to be with all of you today with my friends and colleagues, Tony, Susan, and Marissa. So for those who might not be able to see me as well, I'm a middle-aged white man with gray hair, wearing glasses, black pants, and a jacket. I am a person with disabilities, and I'm a long-term accessibility advocate in the Government of Canada most times, because if you see something and you don't say anything about it, it just goes undone. So that's been really literally the story of my career. I think it's a great blend of panelists here today, because we've gone from Tony's introduction to Statistics Canada, the work that we do, to Marissa speaking about the latest data on the Canadian Survey and Disabilities, and then I get to wrap it up by speaking to our individual approach, Statistics Canada's individual approach to accessibility. Something, as Tony said, we're very proud of, even as we're cognizant that there's a lot of work ahead. You know, to start off with a couple of statistics, because I'm a researcher and work at Sess2 Canada. In the calendar, so our accessibility plans go from September to September, and from September 2022 to September 2023, Statistics Canada, largely actually Susan's team was responsible for this, I will say, published 28 different sign language videos in support of data releases or studies. These videos have audio, sign, and captioning, and have a fully accessible transcript as well. And what's important to note is that these videos got thousands of views and video completions. And what's neat about video completions is that's someone who actually took the time to either view or listen to the video to completion, which means that these accessible formats are being used. And that is so important. And I mean, that's one of the big successes of our last year, I think. So as many of you know, our Accessible Canada Act aims to create a barrier-free Canada by 2040 by identifying barriers and preventing the creation of new ones in areas, sadly only for now under federal jurisdiction, but we'll get there. So the Act is broken down into seven key pillars, so I'll break them down really quickly. Employment, the built environment, information and communication technologies, communication, acquisition of goods and services, buying things, design and delivery of programs and services, and of course, transportation. And under the Act, so we, like many other federally regulated entities, we published our plans by December 2022. But our plan included two additional pillars, and one of them was workplace accommodation, so a specific additional pillar on accommodation, and a specific additional one on culture, which is, to me, is the single most important one, because without changing the culture, you can't achieve change anywhere. And I'm not biased at all. I'm currently the lead on culture pillar, but truly speaking, if you change culture, you can change everything else after it. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of how we're approaching accessibility culture change at StatCan, both through our plan and more importantly through the progress of which we've published in our report. So we have a very strong accessibility team led by people such as Tony, with senior management and a working level lead for each one of these pillars, which is really kind of neat. We have regular meetings with all our leads to review our plans and to ensure our continued progress towards action laid out in the plan. And we have to report. We have to report on our plans and actions monthly and quarterly to senior management, and we have to be accountable to our management team on our progress. And I will say that our ADM, our assistant chief statistician responsible for this, takes no prisoners, and she holds us to account. And she can be terrifying if you haven't done your homework. I love her very much. Thank you, Kathleen. She's great. And all of these actions that people report on, so they're captured by my team. And we then turn it around and we write them in our annual report as dictated by the Act. And transitioning right to the report, despite many challenges, and again, I cannot emphasize, we are a venerable institution with massive history, so change is hard. And especially in Statistics Canada, where we have methodological history as well. This change is very hard. But I'm very proud to say that our 2022-2023 report lists over 100 separate high-level actions, concrete actions taken by the department towards our accessibility plan goals. And most of these actions represent a huge amount of work with hundreds of individual actions behind that. So what I thought I'd do is just share with you a few key examples from both the report and actions we'll be reporting on in the upcoming report. So first of all, culture change. Awareness, right? We have delivered dozens, whether it's myself or colleagues like Susan and Marissa or Tony or many other parts of our department, because there's a lot of commitment. Dozens of presentations on awareness, training sessions, joint events open to the public with partners like the Canadian Disability Network, Live, Work, Play. We've touched on topics ranging from our accessibility plan, our engaging disability innovation study, the CSD, simple things like how to have accessible evacuation procedures, right? Key things, right? How do you make sure that you're safe and accessible, or accessibly safe? Ergonomic lending libraries, right? A lot of this equipment costs a lot of money, but if you have a central library and you can lend it out to individuals when it's needed, it reduces your costs. Office noise level measurements, programming languages, our upcoming workplace accessibility passport, awareness of deaf-blindness, which was an incredible event. I think, Tony, you were there at that. We hadn't expected that many people. We had over 600 people come to that. Accessible presentations, presentations on how to make accessible presentations and documents, how screen readers work. Actually, that one's coming up in a few weeks. All our activities for National Accessibility Week and Disabled Employee Awareness Month, and many more. Per the Act, we have developed, in fact, and are managing a centralized and anonymous feedback system for all employees, Canadians, and external StatCan users. And when we receive feedback, we are legally bound to log it and to communicate it to the areas responsible, much like our InfoStats line. And those people are then mandated to respond both back to the person who requested help, but also they have to tell us how they resolve the issue. And for instance, one that might be of interest to this room, January we received a feedback request, and a lot of them aren't anonymous, they just come right to us, to provide digital braille and large print versions of our accessibility report, which of course we did, but that's one of those things that when Canadians reach out and say, hey, it's accessible, but could I have an even more accessible format? We absolutely do that. Numerous pillars in the department. We've collaborated to create a huge online resources full of how-to guides and guidance on how to make our work more accessible. And we share this daily with people because they'll say, I don't know how to make a document accessible. Well, I'm not going to do that for you. But here's a few tips, and here's a plethora of stuff. In particular, our instruction on how to write an accessible email is so good as now the Government of Canada standard on our accessibility, on the digital accessibility toolkit for the Government of Canada. Our Duty to Accommodate team has worked incredibly hard to reduce wait times for accommodations, and they're going beyond that. They're actually going around the department and building in physical zones to accommodate people who may have very specific needs that can't be met. In just your standard office environment. And they're also working very hard with their built environment team to make all of our floors incredibly basically accommodating, to the point where I had a duty to accommodate plan when I was in a previous agency, and I moved to StatsCan, and I haven't had to put it in place or use it because everything is just so incredibly accessible right off the bat. Our staffing team, amongst many other actions, I could talk about them for hours, they developed a partnership strategy for accessibility and inclusive employment, and started discussions with universities, disability employment service organizations, student associations for persons with disabilities. If we want to recruit talent with lived experience, we have to, and if we want to increase representation of persons with disabilities in the workforce, the staffing team is off to a huge start. And I will actually just say, as an aside, my entire team, including myself, we are all persons with lived experience with disability, and so that's, it would be kind of weird if we weren't advocating for ourselves. But that's kind of neat. It's the first time I've ever been on a team where every single person was a person with deep understanding of lived experience with disability. We have actually, one of the things I'm really proud of, we've launched the first internal sponsorship program for executives and mid-level leaders who are part of equity-seeking groups, and can help basically increase the representation of equity-seeking groups in senior management positions, which again, if you're going to create change, sometimes you have to be there to do it. Our built environment team is working incredibly hard to increase accessibility of all our buildings, and we consult regularly with our person with disability community. They've done so much it's hard to list, from new floors with adaptive zones and highly accessible working areas. But one key thing that stood out for me, and again, one of dozens of things they've done, is they enhanced our employee emergency communications tool. When emergencies happen and we have to talk to our employees and say, hey, something's happening, evacuation or whatever, to include messages in American Sign Language. And it worked. And that was amazing to me, and it worked. And we have actually had employees who said, yeah, I got your message. That was great. And our entire complex is under construction, so they're constantly running around to make sure that we can all enter and exit safely, and it doesn't always work, but we're getting better. Our information communication technology team is actively working with central agencies on the accessibility of our new of our common IT tools. And things as simple as you need a new version of a screen reader installed, a new Braille keyboard, they're on it, usually half an hour, they've got you taken care of. Small things like our communications team, they've added the use of video relay services, which is Canada's free sign language sign language interpretation system. They've added that to the census. They're currently, I believe they're working on Braille, large print, DAISY, and sign language versions of various census products for upcoming census tests and for, of course, Census 2026. So they're really on it. Our procurement team, I can talk forever about how I'm working with them on how they're turning all our procurement documents into accessible formats. Last fall, we actually helped them draft detailed accessibility language for a request for proposals for training software. And I'm particularly biased, I used to manage this team. Our programs and services team, they've revised our digital product accessibility standard for reviews, meaning that as of last February, you can't put out any product unless it's fully accessible. And if it can't be made accessible, you basically have to brief up all the way to senior management. And this past year, they conducted over 100 accessibility reviews of digital services, which could be anything from a simple software solution to a 400-question survey. Across the Government of Canada, every department and agency has published an accessibility plan and a first report. We have multiple internal Government of Canada committees where we pool knowledge and resources. So, as I'm sure you've probably heard, we're in the process of implementing a government-wide accessibility passport, which will support employees in discussions with management on accommodations. And what's really neat is it serves as a record which can be then be used to put in measures if they move jobs, right? Their accommodations travel with them because of the passport. I'd be remiss to not talk about our shining star, the Shared Service Canada's Accessibility, Accommodations, and Adaptive Computer Technology Program, or AAACT, or ACT. They support us by holding training sessions on everything from procuring accessible technology, accessible features on smartphones, and how it's really important that we all make our products work with smartphones, accessible documents, and more. PSPC, our Public Service and Procurement Canada, they've developed an accessible procurement toolkit. And actually, when I started at StatsCan and I started contracting again, the first thing I was sent was an accessibility attestation, where you have to explain what accessibility features are built into your product or your contract, and if not, you have to fully justify it. And sometimes they won't accept your justification. So we've learned a lot. The Values and Ethics Code of the Public Service has many pillars, and one of them is respect for people. And at StatsCan, and I hope across the government, I've really been only working on this recently, we're equating accessibility with our values and ethics code. Because to be inaccessible is to not be respectful of our people, whether Canadians or employees. And to wrap up my remarks, I just need to say this. Change of this nature, cultural and process and methodology change, it's incredibly hard to do across these, not just StatsCan, but the venerable institution of the Government of Canada, because we have such deeply established processes. But at the same time, it's a huge opportunity for us. And I'm extremely proud of what we've accomplished in the past few years and our plans going forward. And I want to share, before we turn to questions, going back to you, Dr. Gordon, I wanted to share something, and this is actually something that my director just said the other day, because she's fighting fiercely to change our entire approach. And she's equated, as you know, in the 1960s, we passed the Official Bilingualism Act, and now we've passed the Accessible Canada Act, and as she puts it, we're officially bilingual, and now it's time to be officially accessible. So that's it. Hopefully you got some value out of that, and hopefully I've been able to express just what we're doing. And I think, we can never do enough, but I think we're really trying really hard to make our workplaces really accessible. Back to you, Dr. Gordon. And encore une fois, n'hésitez pas de poser les questions dans les deux langues officielles. Please don't hesitate to ask your questions in both official languages. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really like that last bit particularly. We're officially bilingual. Now we have to become officially accessible. I think that's fantastic. We're going to a question and answer session. Morgan has been taking questions virtually. We'll do some online, but before we do, I'm going to kick it off with a question of my own. I'd like to ask you folks from the CSD that the data you collect relies very much on self-identification of vision loss. And the data that many of us in the sort of health community are used to is data that comes from doctors actually doing visual acuity examinations. So if you're looking at the prevalence of vision loss, it's based on visual acuity. You're looking at prevalence of vision loss based on self-identification to some extent. Well, okay, but can you explain the difference and how the data can or should be used when there's this kind of distinction?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Should I turn the microphone on or?
Please.
Is this mic on? I'm trying to see. It's on.
Okay. So the CSD asks people first, the first step, the screening is if they have difficulty with daily activities because of difficulty seeing, even when wearing glasses or contacts. So if somebody has no difficulty with their daily activities despite having vision loss or being born without vision or low vision, they may say, no, I never have difficulty, and they would not be in scope for our survey because they aren't experiencing limitations. It's not about the functional limitation of the vision. It's about their experience in their environment and the difficulties they experience. That's what makes a disability, according to the CSD. But as Marissa mentioned, we do have many surveys, such as the Canadian Community Health Survey, I can only think of the acronym for, there's a health measures survey that asks, that does some tests. It'll take people's weight and measure their height, and it'll do blood work. They may do basic vision tests as well. That may be, if you want information on functional limitations and the degree of vision loss, that those sources may be of better use to you, and we can help get you connected to those data sources if you need.
Okay. So technically, I could be identified as having vision loss. I could, for argument's sake, have 20/60 vision.
Yeah.
But as long as I'm not bothered by it, I wouldn't be in your survey.
If you have the supports, the accommodations, the aids and assistive devices that you require, if you do not feel that you are limited in your daily activities, then you would not be in scope for the survey.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks very much. Okay, well, I'm going to bounce around to my second question, which is for Jeremy. Okay, you talked a lot about all the wonderful things that the government in general and StatsCan in particular are doing on accessibility. How do you transfer that to other organizations and ensure that all organizations in the country are doing what you're doing?
Oh, that's a great question. Well,
and I want to answer that one after too. Go ahead first. But yeah.
That we're leading by example is really, we don't have the jurisdiction or the power to make changes over other organizations, but we can do what we can and guide the way.
No, I'll add my part, and then I'll let Tony add his part. I think one of the things we do is we are on an astonishing amount of interdepartmental committees where literally you'll have small agencies or even huge agencies who either don't have the resources or aren't agile enough to move, and we share we share all our best practices. And you'll have people crying out saying, "Oh my gosh, can I have your plan? Can I have this? Can we meet? Can you explain to us how you do this?" Just a few weeks ago, we were actually giving a bunch of presentations, and we had some colleagues from Canadian Heritage that we just happened to mention it to in another call. And we went from a call of 50 people to a call of nearly 200 people because Canadian Heritage joined our StatCan internal meeting on the call because they needed to know about this. So we do it like that, essentially. We share and share like, and we help out. In fact, our accessibility team is reviewing some materials for, we have a really expert accessibility testing team. They're reviewing materials for public safety right now, who does not have a team of experts. So, I mean, it's all, at the end of the day, it's all taxpayers' money, right? It's what we call the no wrong door approach. At the end of the day, we have to do it. So whether it's us helping somebody else or them helping us, that's how we're going to do it.
Thanks.
A few more words to say about this, in addition to what my colleagues just mentioned. As champion, I've always wanted to pass the torch and bring that torch elsewhere. And even internationally or nationally, I've presented the examples and the best practices that we have discovered and established and that we're proud of in Statistics Canada. In 2020, I was approached to serve as Vice President of the Governing Council and as President of the Advisory Council of what is called the Canadian Accessibility Network. That was established by Carleton University, and now it includes more than 100 organizations, collaborating organizations from coast to coast to coast in Canada. Academic, non-profit, private, public sectors organizations are there. And the Advisory Council includes representatives from each of these organizations. We have communities of practice on things like employment, policies, research, design and innovation, and other things that I forget right now, where people work together in not only sharing best practices, but in making sure that we advance the accessibility of the Canadian economy and society for all Canadians. It's a question of human rights. In Statistics Canada, as a statistics agency, I had the privilege to go to Geneva with a delegation of Canadian representatives for what is called the Universal Periodic Review of Human Rights. And we were in front of more than 125 countries that were making recommendations in a room at Palais des Nations in Geneva for one full morning. And near the end, I was adding the cherry on the sundae by talking about the role that StatsCan has to provide independent, transparent, and credible data for the different segments of the population. How this data can help assess where we're at and assess progress or lack of progress openly and independently, so that we have the right conversations, the right decisions, the right actions in this country to improve things for human rights of all Canadians. So it's very dear to my heart that everywhere I can go, that I explain that better understanding, more knowledge with fact-based information helps us to improve, helps us to better act, to take the steps in the right direction. And by the way, if this organization or other organizations that you know want to become part of the Canadian Accessibility Network, I'm sure that we should talk after this.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to the next questions, I'd like to repeat how to ask a question. You have to click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, type in your question and click send. That's one way. The other way is to email your question to education@fightingblindness.ca. Okay. And with that, I will pass it. Well, should we go to the audience first? Okay. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay.
Hi, how are you guys? My question here is, as I see, there is like in the disability from 2017 to 2022, this kind of disabilities has increased and some are decreased. There is like any other surveys or like follow-up questions, like to pinpoint like the factors that affect the increase or the decrease of like what kind of disability?
We are still I guess I should speak into the microphone. We're still finalizing our analysis plans. It's difficult because we don't follow the same group of people. So we can't say that disability has increased because of something, but we can, our future research will look at, I can't say which product exactly, but we will be considering some factors that are related to disability changes over time. Is there a higher prevalence of something that may be related to something else? We're limited in what we can do by the sample design, but it is an important consideration in understanding why the composition and how the composition of the disability population has changed.
Okay. With that, we'll pass it on to my Vanna.
I need to come up and...
Morgan did such a great job in taking questions this morning. She's going to take them again this afternoon.
All right, well, we have a couple online. The first one is, I have a question in terms of accessibility for people who do not have online access. So you had a travel survey recently for people with disabilities, but it could only be completed if the person went online. What about low-key accessibility like on the phone or paper returns?
So the Canadian Survey on Disability, the Canadian Survey on Disability is collected through electronic questionnaires. However, everyone has the option of completing over the phone as well. And we do non-response follow-up to ensure that we have an adequate sample of persons with disabilities. And through those means, we ensure that we give people multiple avenues to be able to respond to the survey. The survey itself is far too complex to have as a paper questionnaire. The census is one of the few surveys that continues to have a paper format, and even that is becoming a fairly long survey. It's a lot of pieces of paper. However, if you print out the Canadian Survey on Disability questionnaire, it's like a brick. It's like a good inch and a half thick. It would be far too overwhelming for anyone to do on paper, but we do look to ensure that we have various ways that people can complete the survey. And this includes having the option for it to be completed by proxy. So if somebody needs a survey to be completed on their behalf, someone in their household or in their life can complete the survey on their behalf. Usually well, not even usually. It can either be done through an electronic questionnaire or over the phone.
Thank you.
Can I add to that just briefly? I will just say that, so my unit is in charge of accessible format requests. And we don't like to convert the CSD for the very reasons that Susan has just laid out. But if an official request is made, we are not only legally bound to, but we will do so. And we have done, actually, on some major business surveys and some other surveys, there were some clients who reached out and said, the person that needs to fill this out needs to do so. Actually, they had I'll be very blunt, they had a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, and they can't look at the screen for very long. But they're the employee that fills out the service, and they have a right to do it on paper format. It's not fun having to fill out these giant, because of course there's skip logic. If you answer one question, it takes you to another part, so it's not fun. But we can and have done so in Braille, in large print, in DAISY, in just accessible Word documents, you name it. We will do it. We will spend we will mail it to you no matter what. So if anybody has that request, we will do it. It's just not an amazing respondent experience. But it doesn't mean we won't do it.
We've even done some with visual relay service.
Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, can I just ask a sort of follow-up question on how do you contact people? So you must have sent out somewhere around 100,000 requests because you had over 50,000 respondents. So that 100,000 presumably are randomly drawn somehow. Okay.
Yeah, so the sample survey is based on the census. So we have the question on the census asking people if they have difficulty in, the one question has 6 parts. So whether they have difficulty in 1 or 6 of those areas. And then our methodology team, who is comprised of a bunch of brilliant people who do things I do not understand, they use that information and they draw a sample of 54,000 individuals. We use age groupings to ensure that we have adequate representation of all aspects of the population. For the CSD, having an adequate number of persons aged 65 to, or 65 to 74 and 75 and older is of key importance, given that the prevalence of disability increases with age. So we draw a sample from the census, and that's how we identify persons likely to have a disability. And then the first thing that they get is the set of screening questions, the DSQ, the disability screening questions, so that we can identify whether or not they have a disability. Because as you can imagine, when you ask people if they have difficulty seeing, even when wearing contacts or glasses, a lot of people just see that first, read that first part of the question and go, yeah, I always have difficulty seeing. And then you ask them more questions on the CSD and they go, oh, no, I can see just fine. It's just I need my glasses. So then they're out of scope for the survey, which is how we end up with our final sample file, which is much smaller than the number of people that we surveyed initially. But we use the census and then the CSD to create our sample. And then, how we contact them. So we will use the method that they used. So if someone completed electronically, they will receive electronic communication, email to complete the survey. If somebody completed the survey on paper, but they provided an email. Census? Yeah, I'm looking at Marissa because I wasn't necessarily involved in the survey at this point. So I'm hoping she can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but if somebody provides an email, even though they completed it on paper, they will likely receive a email. If they did not, then we would use their paper address. And we mail letters. Yeah, and we also mail letters to everybody. Yeah, so we will likely hit them two ways, email and a paper letter.
Okay. Thanks. I found your explanation of how you ensure that somebody does actually have a disability is really heartening, if you like, because so often you ask somebody, do you have difficulty seeing? Yeah, I have difficulty seeing, but hold on a second, when you put on your glasses, can you see? Sure.
Yeah.
But the fact that you screen those out, I think, is really important, and I think that's really good information.
Yeah,
so,
we have information on the false positive rate, so the rate that people say, yes, I have difficulty seeing, and then are identified not to have a disability. In some of our documentation, also difficulty hearing, and those are the two most common, because a lot of people will, especially seeing. Seeing is by far the highest rate of false positives, given the comment, like, I'm wearing contacts right now, so, but without them, I cannot legally drive. Nope, no one wants me on the road.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, I have, as you can see, I have a physical disability as well as visual impairment. I live in a condominium, and I was wondering, are the responsibilities of a condominium association the same as any other building in the city? I mean, do the laws of accessibility apply to the condo as well as the other buildings?
Probably answer that a little bit. Again, I want to be very careful that there's things I can say and things I can't say. So that would be under the Ontario that would be under the Ontario laws. I forget exactly the name of it, AODA, Accessibility for Ontario Act. So if the condo association falls under provincial regulation, and you'd have to check and see whether they fall under that jurisdiction, then yes, they would. But again, I can't tell you for sure. I don't know under which jurisdiction they fall. The city also has disability regulations for residential dwellings. So I think what you would need to do would be to determine under which jurisdiction your building falls, whether it's under just municipal or municipal and provincial, and then you could contact those bodies from there. But again, I'm not the expert. That's just stating my very limited knowledge based on reviewing some of the legislation, but I can't. That's just my suggestion to you.
Tony, you want to add to that?
No, I wouldn't have the expertise to add to that.
We have another online question here from Renew. They said, thank you for sharing the CSD 2022 data from Canada and Ontario. I'm representing Deafblind Ontario Services and would like to know how we can get customized data on deaf blindness from the CSD 2022 survey, and who should we contact?
So the CSD does not have a screening specifically for deaf blindness. We ask about the two separately, but I realize that is not necessarily what they're looking for. However, there is an email address at the end of the presentation that they can contact that email address to work on getting custom data requests that would combine those two disability types, so that it may give them approximately what they need, recognizing that it is not the same thing. Like when you cross seeing disability and hearing it's not not the same. But we are beginning to think about what the 2022 CSD will look like, and this is, I know, an area that is of concern and interest, and so I would be happy to connect with this individual so that we could, or this organization. And Tony's got his hand.
Yeah, Susan, I can also add a little bit here. When Jeremy mentioned that panel discussion that we had about raising awareness of the deaf blindness situation and learning more about that for StatsCan employees, that panel that I facilitated was a suggestion that I had made to the different organizations that had approached us exactly for this, for having data tabulations from the 2017 survey. And we also promised to work with them for tabulations eventually for the 2022 surveys, and I have not forgotten that. And as Susan just mentioned, we also promised at that time that we would consult deaf blindness associations for the planning for the 2027 instance of the Canadian Survey on Disability. So thank you for your question and for bringing that up. That's also going to be part of our discussions and plans for the coming months.
Thank you. I don't have any more online. Are there any in the room?
So I had a question kind of going off of what Dr. Gordon asked. So I understand that the most recent survey is based off of the consensus in terms of recruiting participants. How do you assure that the data isn't skewed in terms of who is able to fill it out accessibility-wise for the census? Say someone can't afford a computer, they don't have access, and they're visually impaired. How would they know that the survey exists in the first place, and then also be able to fill it out?
So thank you for that question. We do, following the census, there are coverage studies that look to ensure that we captured the right population for the survey, that people who weren't supposed to complete the census didn't, and that all of the people who were supposed to did complete the census, because we do recognize that there are not everyone who should be completing it, the census ends up doing. So we do have outreach campaigns to ensure that there is awareness of the census. People will receive everyone receives a letter at their door informing them of their census, giving them a special access code, or special access code, or giving them instructions on how to call, like who to call to obtain a paper questionnaire, because we generally don't send out paper questionnaires. They, except for in certain circumstances, they are requested because of saving the trees and cost and things like that. So ideally, that letter would be, even if they, they would use the tools that they have, say their phone, to help them read, or someone in their life would assist them, but we recognize that there could be coverage issues. So our methodologists do adjustments to ensure that we have considered non-response bias and make those sort of calculations. Like I said, they do things that I don't understand, and we try to account for that, but with every, the thing about statistics is unless it is an actual count of every single individual, it is an estimate of the number of people. So, we do a very good job, but there could be some non-response bias, but those coverage studies help us measure that so that we can adjust for it.
If I can add to that really briefly, I have a lot of family in parts of rural Canada, and when I say rural, I mean deep rural. I mean areas that are described as dark sky preserves because there's no artificial light in that area. And somehow you will go to the door after a long winter, 2021, we found the census letters inside the door. The census coverage team is astoundingly complete, thorough, and making sure that census letters get to dwellings. They have no idea whether anybody lives there, but they're going to make sure that dwellings that look like they might be lived in have a census letter. And I've personally helped elderly members of my family, some who are blind, who have advanced glaucoma, various other things, complete the census, and a lot of other people do too. So it's quite astounding. I will say that the census outreach team is one of the single most unique parts of Canada, and that they get to places that most Canadians don't even know exist. And that's truth.
Yeah. Oh, and another thing is the non-response follow-up. So if a household has not responded, an individual will go to the door, and in that case, they may be able to assist the individual in completing a paper questionnaire. So that's another way that we ensure that we're covering the adequate population.
I will also mention here that after each census, we do coverage studies, which is actually another survey to see if we have double counted some Canadians or if we have missed some people in Canada. We do that with our methodology team, and they help our demographers to adjust our population estimates and to account for what would have been missed in the census. I'm happy to report that in the 21 census, there's less than 1% difference in the different provinces of Canada. And those coverage studies, along with the population estimates, are reviewed by representatives of each provinces and territories as well before we officially publish the coverage studies and the new population estimates that are rebased after each census.
Thank you very much, Tony. That's very interesting. I have another question.
Go ahead.
To me, one of the big values of the CSD is comparing 2022 with 2017. Now, there's been some methodology changes. Can you sort of talk about how comparable the data from 2022 is to 2017?
So those two cycle years are very comparable. It's only when you're looking at specific content that you have to consider whether or not the content has changed. So the way we identify people as being likely to have a disability on the census, and then the follow-up disability screening questions, those are identical between the two. So the methodology is exactly the same. So which is why we can say that the percentage of persons with disabilities in Canada has grown by 5 percentage points over time, and that the prevalence of seeing disabilities has increased by 2% in the past 5 years. When you want to get into things like looking at aids and assistive devices or other content that changes as aids and assistive devices evolve, you need to look at the questions and ensure that you're grouping the categories in the right way to do these comparisons. However, largely the survey is comparable. It's just the details that there's too many to get into, but if you ever wanted to get data and you want to compare the two, there's a good chance that it is comparable. It's just there are certain things like the module on barriers to accessibility, that's new. So we don't have the comparison for 2017. Following the passage of the ACA, that was established to create a baseline of data, and moving forward, we'll continue to measure barriers to accessibility and working on identifying the most relevant and learning as we go, because I also work on accessibility statistics, and it's such a new area. It's so challenging to understand the barriers that are experienced by the various disability types, and even within each disability type, not everybody has the same experiences. So how do we capture that accessibility data in a way that is meaningful for all individuals?
Thanks, that's really helpful.
I thought I would just plug the accessibility
No, that's great.
part of that as well.
Thank you.
Can we ask one more question from online?
Sure.
Okay. This is, can you tell us why you use the term seeing disability versus visual disability?
I don't know. Like I mentioned in my biography, I joined the disability and accessibility teams in 2020, actually the very first day of the pandemic, March 16th, 2020. It was quite the learning curve. So I don't have that history. I don't know quite why we use seeing and not visual or vision related. I don't know. Tony, do you happen to
No.
You have a longer...
No, I would not know, but I think we could ask some of the people internally to have a bit more of the inside story.
It could be, so when the current set of screening questions were developed, it was in consultation with a technical advisory group. The recommendation to use seeing disabilities may have come out of that, but it's something I could look into. And if you want to connect us with that individual, we could try to get an answer back. Better than I don't know, because general, I don't,
Usually you do know.
Some history stuff, there's only so much you can learn in 4 years. Yeah.
You got a question, or are you saying?
No, I'm saying.
Okay, we're done.
We're out of time.
Okay, well, with that, I'd like to thank Marissa, Susan, Jeremy, and Tony very much for being here today and for taking our questions, even though some of them may be difficult, like where does the seeing disability come from? So thanks to all of you. It's been wonderful.
Thanks. Thank you. Stats Canada came through again. Thank you for joining us today. This concludes our first event of 2024. We look forward to seeing you during our Vision Month in May, when the Canadian Council of the Blind will celebrate its 80th anniversary. Wow. Thank you and good day.